Доброго дня, шановні учасники круглого столу.
Good morning, dear roundtable participants. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Pavlo Kravets. I'm the national representative of the FSC Ukraine. And for quite a while, at the same time, I've been a scholar in forest management. I represent an international non-governmental organization that takes care of forests and responsible harvesting and forest management. This is a unique opportunity today and a chance to talk a little bit about daily issues that have to do with the country's and our people's survival in this extraordinary and absolutely brutal circumstances. I mean the war. And this activity today would not be possible unless, at this point, the defenders of Ukraine stood in the front line defending each and every one of us. Let us commemorate those who have fallen in the front line with a minute of silence.
Дякую.
Thank you.
Власне,
Actually,
у нас сьогодні є унікальний
indeed, this is a unique chance today to actually discuss all these matters in the circle of professionals, where we have also representatives of the Ukraine's parliament, government agencies, non-governmental organizations, and this way we can discuss issues that have to do with the country's recovery, and not just to rebuild it, but following all the best green principles that we all aspire for to make sure our country gets better, and therefore we want to build it back better this way. So that we create favorable and enabling environment for people to live. And there might be a question like, our organization has been taking care of responsible forest management, but we cannot stay aside those issues that have to do with Ukraine's transition to the EU principles and standards in the development of circular and green economy. So therefore, today we have an opportunity to kickstart this discussion, which is related to green recovery. We've been discussing some of those issues preliminarily. I wanted to put them on the agenda. So we decided that those have to be roundtable discussions of this manner, and the most demandful ones would be related to policies, regulations, and how civil society perceives and understands what green recovery actually means, and how wood is in line with all those expectations, when this recovery process may include as much use of timber as possible. To ensure balanced and impartial discussion, we were looking for international experts. And we invited Brian Milakovsky, who is right now with us online, and he will briefly tell us about this study that he has done upon our request. And Oleg Panyuta will be the moderator of today's event. This is a well-known journalist and a TV host. Oleg, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Pavlo. Since we already introduced Brian and his study, Brian, are you with us right now? Can you hear us? If so, then we would be really grateful for listening to the findings of your study. Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. Brilliant. Good morning. Like Pavlo has mentioned, I've done a study for FSC Ukraine on about the potential role of wood in green recovery for Ukrainian cities and towns and villages that suffered from the Russian aggression. And today I'd like to look together with you at some of the findings of this survey. Pavlo, I have slides. I can actually share them if you want. Should I do that or somebody else will? Yes, we would be wondering to see the slides. If you want to share them on the screen, I think we're going to see them. Yeah, hang on a second. I'm going to try and do it.
Є зображення.
Yeah, we can see the slide. Not the full screen though, but anyways. In this study, we were trying to find a number of different strengths and weaknesses that Ukraine has around the issues of wood's potential role as construction materials in this kind of green recovery process. There are objective strengths. First one is that there is a substantial production potential or capacity in terms of wood production and wood processing. Over the last 10 years, this has been tremendous growth in this capacity. And luckily enough, now, when the big recovery is started, we can already see the first opportunity for growing this potential even more. If once a decision is made to build like multi-story buildings of wood, the way they do it in the EU these days, then this domestic manufacturing capacity can cover a substantial share of building materials, and this can be a strong incentive for the economic growth. And when Ukraine starts its recovery process, primarily engaging loans as the financial resource, it is important that you use as much Ukrainian domestically produced materials as possible. It is also very important that the recovery process, both regular recovery and green recovery, to be sustainable. It must incentivize economic growth. And a very important factor or fact is that Ukraine already has producers and engineers who are capable of using wood as a resource. And it's a very important resource for multi-story buildings. Especially there is one construction underway in Korostin. It was a revolutionary solution in the European Union when they started erecting multi-story buildings using wood, and it was a large-scale development. Ukraine already produces these materials, which is very important. One more important thing to mention, the European Union and its creditors, like the European Investment Bank, for instance, they want to make sure Ukraine reaches decarbonization in the construction sphere. This is one of the European Green Deal goals. And this is the EU climate policy. So therefore, this carbon footprint has to be reduced, and especially that is important for the Ukrainian concrete and steel. And this is a really challenging process and an issue of dozens of billions of euro in investment that is going to take many years. But the wood materials have extremely low carbon footprint. That's one of the decarbonization opportunities, because these materials can really play a big role here. It means that in the wood development projects, they are going to be very much attractive for the European investors and financial organizations. EIB already has green criteria whenever they select projects for funding, and wooden materials can help a lot in this process of attracting more investment and getting positive score points based on those criteria when the bank is going to be selecting projects. Another strength, as from what I can see in this situation, this is the Ukrainian government's intent to support domestic producers and contribute to their role in the country's recovery. That goes from the president all the way down to the Minister of Economy. We constantly hear these messages that government has to pursues this intent, and this is really important. But there are barriers, however, that have to be overcome if we want to see the substantial role played by domestic producers in this green recovery process. This is the barrier, and this is exactly what we would like to discuss today during the roundtable. First of all, this will require legislative change. When I was making my study, I heard from many experts and professionals in the field that the national building norms do not allow using wood for erecting houses higher than 3 stories. So when there is more than 3 floors, that's not allowed to. Unlike this is with the European legislation, like in the Netherlands, France, and Sweden. In May, I visited the Ukraine Recovery Conference, and I heard so much about this challenge from the local government people. They told me, yes, erecting buildings from local materials, domestically produced, for IDPs or locals who lost their houses would be a brilliant solution, but the legislation does not allow building multi-story buildings from wood, and the European donors do not want to finance single-family, one-story homes. And I've been talking about this a lot, and I heard a lot of things like this from the local people. But this legislative alignment process is underway all the time. I think we need to engage subject matter institutions and agencies into this process. However, even if building the wooden homes that are taller than 3 floors is going to be legalized, there's a problem that the Ukrainian development companies do not have enough experience of erecting such buildings. And lack of this experience is going to be another challenge, of course, for the industry. Another challenge. Not all people in Ukraine treat wood as a green resource, because there are disseminated doubts in the society that forestry farms are not sustainable and not responsible. And we need to confess right now that there are doubts in the society of this nature. Not all civil society organizations that have been involved in green recovery of Ukraine, or if they fight climate change today, perceive wood as a green resource. There is a great need for building proper dialogue between the forestry industry, and civil society.
Такий діалог був
This dialogue
у Європейському Союзі
was there in the EU
багато років.
many years ago.
Там організовано на
They organized
рівні
the national
країнах, як
level
Франція,
discussions like in Sweden, Italy, and France. They've had these dialogues on how to best use timber
елемент
as
декарбонізації.
one of the decarbonization tools
Так, щоб це не було
in the development industry to make sure it's not causing any harm for the country's
і
environment.
в процесі цього діалогу сформувала
These processes, these dialogues, helped build coalitions of progressive architectures,
виробників
activists, manufacturers,
і державних органів
and government agencies all together.
лобують,
And they now lobby
намагаються лобіювати будівництво з
the
деревини.
use of timber in the development process. This process has not yet started in Ukraine.
Процес ще не почався в Україні. Але
However,
нам треба признатися,
we need to also realize that neither the legislative change nor public policies in support of wood industry will suffice unless civil society and the entire society of the country is going to push this forward. We need to work on this. And I think this Forest Stewardship Council is an ideal platform to kickstart this dialogue. Can we go to the next slide, please?
це я забув, я сам.
Sorry, it was mine. Sorry.
Так. Зараз вже перший блок
So the first part of this presentation is already done.
для наших фахівців.
And we already have a number of the different questions that we developed as agenda items for today's event. And today we would like to discuss all those questions when possible. So here are the questions that's related to public policies. Let us try to actually discuss those issues and look for answers in our here in the room, and we already have the live broadcast on the Ukr Informs website. So those both online and offline, all the participants may ask questions to our participants. And I would allow myself to ask the first one to Olena Shulyak, because she's in charge of the Parliamentary Committee for Regional Development and City Planning. Olena, we realize what kind of, how large scale the recovery process is going to be that Ukraine will have to face after the active combat phase. And even now we cannot yet understand how large scale this process is going to be. There are discussions about this, but the scope is going to be huge. Is there a place for using wood in the context of Ukraine's pursuit to the European Union, green recovery, etc.? Given there will always be seduction to make things as soon as possible from what you have available. So can Ukrainian wood be exactly the right resource and a real driver for the Ukraine's recovery process? Thank you very much, Oleg. Good morning, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here at this roundtable discussion. It's brilliant that such initiatives show up today, and this is the process that is pushed forward from the bottom all the way to the top. We really appreciate that we have so many experts and government institutions involved in this process. Right now, indeed, there is discussion to adopt the legislative framework and how the key recovery principles are going to look like. And in our committee, we start a series of public consultations on this matter. The first one is going to take place on July the 30th. So taking advantage of this opportunity, I'd like to invite everybody who's here today to this meeting. And we're going to discuss what kind of standards are going to be used in the recovery process. I think the principle that we're discussing today a lot, like green recovery, green transformation is going to be one of the locomotives. And we would like to actually put that down at the level of the available legislation. We've been talking a lot about the new European Bauhaus, and I think we have a lot of objectives to handle before we push these rules forward and disseminate all these principles. We can demonstrate what kind of projects can be run through these initiatives, and then I'm sure this way we're going to walk the talk. So today we have some of the statistic. It's not brand new for the European market. 35% of greenhouse gas emissions, they belong to the construction sector. The production of plastics, concrete and steel produce a lot of CO2. Wood indeed is an alternative for such materials as steel and concrete. So whenever they're used in development designs, we can radically cut greenhouse gas emissions in the development sector. From our end, we as legislators have to work on these initiatives, but these building norms are not endorsed by the parliament. They were amended back in 2017, actually, and some of the new regulations were adopted. Now they have to be updated again. The parliament of this convocation passed several amendments to the laws, primarily what has to do with basic organizations that work with those building regulations can only develop those regulations themselves, but also our universities can do this and self-governing organizations can be involved. So all the stakeholders have to get involved in this process of developing new building regulations. And I'm sure this Ministry of Recovery will have to initiate this process and consider all those important changes. Another thing that I would like to draw your attention to, the Parliament already voted for a number of laws to implement European regulation, EU Regulation 305. It had to already be enforced since the 1st of January 2023, but due to the war, we could not do it. So it's going to be enforced as of the beginning of the next year. So we want to make sure that this European regulation to be to be adopted here in Ukraine. For this purpose, we need to engage the Recovery Ministry and all the stakeholders involved. Since we have limited time today, I have to underline that for us, as the Parliament, one of the mandatory tools is the Ukraine facility, and you know that till 2027, Ukraine will be receiving 50 billion euros, and the first payments, disbursements have already been done. And this policy includes circular economy, green recovery, and many other important things to protect our environment. So I'm sure that there's going to be a number of different discussions on how to use wood properly in this development process. We need to invite our environmental committee representatives here so that they're involved in this discussion as well. And last but not least, you know that all the recovery projects will be scrutinized through this digital ecosystem called DREAM. And the DREAM developers actually suggested that if the project is in line with the principles of the European Bauhaus, there will be a special mark assigned to every single project. So there's going to be another marker for those environment-friendly projects, and those communities who are interested in such projects in this recovery process, they'll of course have advantages by using different environment-friendly materials. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm sure that with the joint effort, we can do everything together so that different materials could be used here in Ukraine and this will contribute to our recovery process and the Ukrainian economic growth. Thank you, Olena. We now have an opportunity to listen to our online participants. Dmytro Kosilevsky is a deputy head of the Ukrainian Parliamentary Committee on Green Development. So he is online with us. So we await you to join our discussion. Dmytro, can you hear us? Yes, good morning, I can hear you. Thank you for this opportunity to talk to you this morning. Dmytro, what's your vision? What's the national strategy that's supposed to be in this green recovery process? And is there an active place for wood in this agenda as one of the key elements to this program in general? Thank you, Oleg. Thank you very much for the invitation and this opportunity to talk. I'm deputy chairman of the environmental committee, so I'm going to be talking about the economic and environmental factors altogether. In 2016, we had the moratorium for exporting wood. This was an important strategic decision that the Ukrainian state pushed forward and withstood. Why is that important? First of all, this moratorium stopped the barbarian annihilation of the Carpathian and other forests in Ukraine. Thanks to this moratorium, they stopped those barbarian cuts that we had observed before, even online. And they started this kind of recovery process in the Ukraine's forests. I'm talking about figures. Between 2016 and 22, the scale of cuts were reduced by 30%. And last year, they were 16 millions of cubic meters of wood cut in the Ukraine's forests. And thanks to this moratorium, the processing efficiency grew a lot. They used to just cut log timber and send abroad, but thanks to the processing companies, they started producing added value products, furniture, panels, boards, whatever. Again, speaking about figures, the processing growth was 50% or 52%, and the overall industry was only growing at 6% every year. Since the moratorium was introduced, the wood processing industry has become one of the most investment attractive sectors, just because the raw materials stayed in the domestic market. To confirm that with figures, the investment into wood processing between 2016 to 22 grew by 90%. I was elected in Dnipro, and it's hard to surprise me with those big production companies. I understand what is ArcelorMittal, Kryvyi Rih, or Zaporizhstal, but when I saw modern wood processing, I was really surprised. If you go, for instance, to Rivne, you can see absolutely huge, modern, high-tech company. And only that company alone invested over 1 billion euro in the Ukraine's economy thanks to this effort. And this is just one of many examples. One Austrian company that we are talking about. There are such companies as Swisspan, Odell, and others. There are Ukrainian companies. Probably around 10 billion of investment was received thanks to these companies. Just because this moratorium was timely introduced. So there are less cuts, the environment is getting better, and the volume of wood in Ukraine attracted more investment. And that's how we faced full-scale invasion. The situation has changed because the forests have become a strategic resource for the Ukraine's defense sector. Of course, all those fortifications and trenches are built with wood. And those who visited the eastern territories, you've seen that there are no windows that would not be damaged. All of them are shattered, unfortunately, and there's a lot of wood needed over there. Now, the environment has deteriorated a lot because parts of the forest were physically annihilated. I visited the forest in Serbianka. There is a name of this forest, but there is no forest itself in the area. And those forests that suffered less, they have one very substantial problem. They're contaminated with ordnances, mines, and other explosive devices. So when we're talking about the mining, we need to realize that this does not only have to do with agriculture, but this also includes forests. War has affected our forests a lot. So whenever I see articles that somebody is calling to stop the moratorium, it means this individual wants to annihilate or to kill the processing industry, and those people probably want to provoke even worse conditions for the Ukraine's economy. The moratorium, which has triggered this important change from the standpoint of environment and economy, has to be continued for at least 10 years until we demine and restore our forest masses, forested areas, to the European standards. Again, in this recovery context, there is one important thing to mention. When we want to recover our country, then we need to ask ourselves the question, how we want to do it. If we invite international companies that are going to bring their materials and experts together, we're going to have recovered country, but it's going to be empty. Nobody's going to be back because there'll be no jobs here. There'll be no good reasons for people to come back to the recovered municipality if there is no place to work. And to make sure we have jobs, we need to make sure that Ukrainian companies operate. So in this recovery process, it's important to underline the more Ukrainian domestically produced materials we use in this recovery process, the more chances we're going to have to restore the country and bring it back to life. Because when we use only foreign produced materials, then you can see the Bosnia and Herzegovina's example or the other Balkan countries. You can find examples over there when the buildings are there, but people don't live in those houses just because they never managed to launch or relaunch their economy. This recovery process is a huge opportunity to expand the local wood materials market for decades ahead with a huge positive effect for the Ukraine's economy. Okay, I can see that I've taken a lot of time. So the moratorium has to be maintained, and it has to be there before we clear all the mines from the Ukraine's forests. And we need to make sure that the recovery process engages as much Ukrainian domestically produced materials as possible, including wood. This is our objective for the next decade. Thank you very much for your intervention and for your opinion. Thanks a lot. I just wanted to ask from those participants online, we have some of the online participants. Volodymyr, can you hear us?
Я не знаю, чи чути зараз мене.
I'm not sure if you can hear me. Yes, we can. Volodymyr, just say a couple of words about what you think regarding the Ukraine's national policies on renewable materials, including wood. I just wanted to share some of the slides, but unfortunately, my connection is not very stable, but okay, I'm going to try anyways. Can you see something on the screen? Yes, we can.
Продовження того, що вже сказали колеги.
In continuation of what the colleagues already said, we realize that our objective is to increase the country's added value, which means Ukraine's GDP growth, and we need money for this, for the defense, for our people, for our economy. And in this aspect, wood is highly important. This is a very important resource which can actually help resolve the issue. I'm going to show you one slide here. This is the presentation that we did together with Dmytro Kisilevsky. It shows how added value grows in timber production. So we can see If you take 1 cubic meter of wood, the green field shows you to $26 of added value. If we have processed wood, we're going to have 190, and when this is furniture, this is $290 from 1 single cubic meter. So that's how added value grows, and we need to put emphasis on processing. Wood is a really valuable material. So that's exactly what we have to do. And it's very good, and I'm fully accepting what's been said. Ukraine wants foreign currency, let's export wood. But this way we only sell raw materials without substantial added value. So we're not going to create any profit for the country. We work on this matter in an in-depth manner, and we understand what we're talking about. So the moratorium that was introduced in 2016, this really incentivized processing. So we have best practices already out there. Let us compare logging in Ukraine and Poland. So we can see pretty much the same total forested area. Poland is smaller, but they have more forests. They have more wood, and we can see that the share of wood resource is 88%. In Ukraine, it's much less. And also the wood logged in 2021, as you can see, in Poland, there's 37 million cubic meters. In Ukraine, that's much less, just 8. And the economic effect is the following. For instance, in 2021, Poland exported furniture and wood for $19 billion, while Ukraine only had 1.4. So from this same volume of wood, they deployed huge exports for 19 billion, and we have only 1.4. That's because they're using their forest in the best possible way, and they exactly resort to the same practices as we discussed them. So they put more emphasis on processing. There are some of the remarks that have to be mentioned here, though. In our opinion, those figures that I've just shown to you, those official figures may not be very accurate. But I think the logging figure can be much lower than maybe be much lower than in reality. For example, let's take how much wood is used for 1 square meter of development. The figures had to be much higher. For instance, internal consumption of wood products between 2017 and 2021 were 2 to 3 million cubic meters. And we understand that it can be 7 to 10 million cubic meters. We cannot see the real situation because very much wood cannot be accounted here. We're going to come back to it. And there is one more important detail here. The recovery that we expect will require a lot of wood. For example, on the left-hand side, you can see some of the findings when we were trying to find out, to evaluate the forecasted volume of construction for the recovery process. Vladimir, unfortunately, we lost you. This information is really useful.
Можливо, ви відновите зв'язок, спробуємо з вами відновити зв'язок і, знову ж таки, ви завершите свою думку. Давайте поки що надамо можливість...
Okay, let us give an opportunity to Oleg Kiko to speak up. He is from the Forest Technical Institute. Yes, hi. I understand you can hear me, right? Yes. What's your impression, and what do you think about the need to adjust public policies on using wood in the green recovery process? Thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity to share my opinions. Just a couple of remarks and things to specify. When we're talking about green recovery in Ukraine or green transformation, I would probably speak a bit broader about it. That's a broader context. And there are three priorities in using wood. The first priority is green energy. So the second priority is green development and green industry. That's number 3. Here are the 3 priorities from the standpoint of Ukraine's green transformation. Regarding this opinion in this society, unfortunately, for some objective and subjective reasons, public opinion does not contribute to such matters like decarbonization and others. But this supply chain has to be clear. Ukraine has selected its European pursuit. There is no reversibility here. If we choose the European path, the Green Deal and European Bauhaus and many other things have to be made clear. If we analyze the European Union's policy and its priority development dimensions, there are 3 of them. Number 1, climate change. Number 2, biodiversity. And number 3, fighting poverty. Regarding our green industries, I would be talking about forests in general, because this is the entire sector that is capable of improving many things with the exports, added value, etc. Forests, in our opinion, is the sector that has to include all the economic fields, and there are like 3 dozen of them. Forest farms, processing, furniture manufacturing, green tourism, etc., etc. Why is this important for us? When we're talking about this unique European trends, then the forests have 3 main qualities. First of all, they consume a lot of CO2, number 1. They store the CO2, and there is a replacement factor. So here we're talking about the 3 major factors. From the society's opinion regarding this, I would insist on Ukraine's irreversible course on the European path. From the standpoint of political problems and policy-related issues, what I would suggest, we plan to organize the Forestry Council at the Cabinet of Ministers. There are so many questions here. What's more important? Furniture production, board production, energy, pellets, wooden houses, or so? To resolve those issues in a sustainable manner, we need to have a council like this together with an analytical center or think tank. There are so many good examples out there from the European Union, and this has to be done at the national level to make sure there is a one-stop solution. Manufacturing that has to do with forest resources or wood is a substantial part of manufacturing, which in the EU has 15% in the economy. While in our case, it's only 5%. This forestry sector council at the Ukraine's cabinet of ministers would involve all the stakeholders, obviously environmental experts, civil society activists, etc. Just a bit about wooden houses. That's a very important factor because building houses from wood is going to be a locomotive for the entire economy, for the forests primarily. Because we have forest farms that are going to play a more important role, we can actually build houses from Ukrainian wood with Ukrainian furniture, Ukrainian boards and plywood. And we need to make those critical policy decisions. First of all, there must be a national program. For instance, let's take the one that exists in Finland. They put together all the money. Whenever they need to build a new school, the school has to be wooden. Or in Austria, let's take their example, 25% of the newly built residential real estate is supposed to be built from wood. There's a unique opportunity here. We need to rebuild Ukraine, and we need to build our country back better. Why wouldn't this recovery and rebuilding process not be green? We need to move forward looking at the best European role models. We have a lot of problems, of course. I was involved in the courses in Bern, Switzerland, at their applied science university. They put together 30 Ukrainian women, externally displaced people, and for the whole year, it's been their third program. They were demonstrating how to rebuild the country in a green manner. They wanted to build a wooden kindergarten at school, and they couldn't do it. They had money. They had 400,000 Swiss francs channeled to this organization. But the Ukrainian building regulations do not allow building those structures higher than 3 floors. So we need not only to change this practice, but also engage so many different agencies. There are different mindset issues. For Ukrainian, a wooden house is a dacha. This is just a one-story small building where you can travel for the weekend and do barbecues. So Ukrainians do not associate wooden houses with a 40-floor building where it was done from cross-laminated timber. There was no disparity like this anywhere else but Ukraine. We now built a factory, but we could not use it today to build Ukrainian houses from wood. There has never been a chaos like this anywhere else. With regards to the other problems, look, okay, we pursue green development in the country and in our industries as well. Whether we want it or not, but public policy has to actually incentivize in-depth processing. I support my predecessor's opinion that we need to continue the moratorium, but I'm afraid we will not be able to actually maintain it because we're moving towards Europe. There are global WTO practices, and the signals that we receive from outside show that sooner or later this is going to be suspended. So we need to run our own policies, and we want to stimulate in-depth processing by economic or other leverages. Secondly, we need to be talking about training. For instance, my team participated in 2 or 3 European projects. In one of them, we were trying to develop methodologies for the Ukrainian wood processors, how to evaluate the carbon footprint, how to pursue biodiversity, and how to be able to reach out to the European markets. Our companies understand that they will have to do it sooner or later. But there's a number of problems here. There's a whole bundle of them. There's a new EUDR. There will be the new environmental reporting practices. And the European Union says if you want to export to us, you should have been compliant with our environmental regulations and requirements. And there are so many things that had to be done through training. We started one project where wood processing and circular economy give us an opportunity to develop new training programs, including at our university. But it seems to me, however, that the conclusion has to be just one. We all thought forests were little dwarfs which produce stools. But in one of the conferences, one government officer said to me, how can you compare with agriculture or space, aerospace? Oh well, dear roundtable participants, if we take a look at the future opportunities from the standpoint of biodiversity, environmental protection, and sustainable development, this sector cannot be replaced by anything else. If we look into the future from the standpoint of economic growth, this sector is crucial. 17.5 million people are employed in the European forestry sector. This is the size of Netherlands. For us, the main objective for the post-war Ukraine's recovery, we need to create jobs. And wood is just a tremendous resource. This is the God's blessing, which will help us make money. But it's not airspace that requires trillions of investment. This investment is required, but it's not that significant. So we need to turn back to the sector. And how we can do it? My first request is to consider a possibility to set up the Forestry Council as an advisory body at the cabinet. We created one like this at the Lviv regional administration, and we've had some positive experience that we can share. Yeah, we're going to try. At least we're going to use your advice in our next interventions. Thank you so much. Orest. Just the last thing I want, if I could, please, in response to the moratorium issue and forested areas. Ukraine is forested by 16%, and in the EU that's 44. Globally, that's 33. We are not going to reach this ratio in 3, 5, or 25 years, but we do have the resources. Thank you so much for your substantial conclusions. And now we're going to try to discuss those issues on how and through which tools we need to change in the country's policies, regulatory frameworks, to use as much wood as possible for construction purposes, especially for the tall buildings. Brian, now coming back to you again. What do you think about those two other issues? Thank you.
Дуже важливий момент слухали від Олени Олексіївни, що
thanks very much to Olena Shuliak.
відкриті
When she mentioned this, that government agencies are open to this kind of expertise and forest management companies, and government agencies are ready to strategize together for the recovery purposes and to apply proper regulatory framework. The building regulations in Ukraine, they're now in the process of transformation and harmonization. For me, it was important to hear that there is openness in this process. And of course, the society can share its own point of view about this. I'm sure that this is the right solution to organize this roundtable discussion as the first step in this process. There are so many different important issues for the subject matter experts from government agencies and institutions.
Які нормативні документи сьогодні перешкоджають будівництво багатоповерхових?
If we have barriers and obstacles on this way, we need to find solutions. Will those building requirements be in line with the European Union's? Or there are still barriers or other alternative opinions?
Такої гармонізації. Я думаю, для лісових професіоналів сьогодні на круглому столі буде дуже цікаво.
I mean, for the experts that are gathered around this roundtable discussion, it's important to understand where we are, whether there is going to be approximation to the European regulations, and will they allow erecting multi-story buildings using wood like they do in Sweden. They now erect 9-story buildings from wood. Or not, that's the question. And again, we need to understand at which stage we are from the standpoint of developing criteria. Thank you very much. Let us pass the floor over to the experts at the table. Thanks very much, Brian. Natalia, this is a question to you. So what's missing for Ukraine's building regulations to be able to allow developing tall high rises. I mean, taller than 3 floors. Right now, I heard somewhere they are planning to build a huge high-rise, up to 193 floors, I think, somewhere in the world. So what do we have to change in our Ukrainian context? First of all, I'd like to thank Brian and stress one more important thing that is going to help us resolve the issue. Like Olena Shuliak mentioned, we already have the EU regulation in place for building products. This is Regulation 305. And the previous one, the market oversight. And then as the first step that could help us push this issue forward and accelerate our approximation with the European standards. A lot of those standards have actually been passed, adopted, and translated. But there's a problem that we already asked Brian for, and thought his support. We had several meetings at the ministry and at the Builders Confederation. This is lack of laboratory capacity for certification purposes, because we need to, by the new legislation, issue declarations for these products. So according to the new regulation, we have 6 different wood products categories that include more than 26 items or different types in line with the European requirements and standards that are adopted in Ukraine. Not all of them were transposed. Some of them are still under development. Unfortunately, we did not have anyone from the ministry. However, all of those have been adopted and they are currently enforced in Ukraine. Okay, so speaking about those declarations, according to the old regulation, we had 6 laboratories like this, like the Kharkiv Institute that Pavlo Kravets has mentioned. And according to the new regulation, we do not have any laboratory of this nature. And there is a problem with equipment. We already talked to Brian and our European partners seeking support in this dimension, because this is really a technical barrier for our manufacturers. And to push this issue forward will be very challenging for themselves. Because this equipment is very expensive, but releasing any kind of product with no declaration is not allowed. Taking those products to Europe will be very challenging and costly. Now we ended up in a situation that for the European manufacturers it's much easier to enter this market than introduce our domestic products in circulation here in the domestic market. Regarding the building regulations, yes, it is. They are now being aligned with the European regulations, but let us be honest. We were not mentally ready and could not accept it broadly. In our understanding, a wooden house is something very basic. That's why we have this reflected in our building regulations. So right now, technologies are different. We have many more opportunities, and indeed, even in the Baltic states, we can see how rapidly this development is taking place. I mean, it's evolving. So they have those modules, including insulation, composites. That's not just wood in the traditional understanding. That's not like a log or something. This technology is very much different, and it also enters the Ukrainian market as well. So revision of the building regulations is crucial in this process. These regulations are not talking about the method. They're talking about the products. that are used in construction. Now, with regards to the environmental criteria, what has been already said that we have to use those principles, and indeed we have the Academy under the European Bauhaus, and those principles are very advanced. There is an opportunity to use those non-price criteria for the procurement purposes, and now all the government agencies give preference to those non-price criteria whenever they want to procure products, including for construction purposes. But we also need to understand that Active House, LEED, BREEAM, and other standards, they took decades to evolve, and they now work in the European Union in line with their established best practices. So we already have the first green development standard in the pipeline. This is the first standard for public buildings, and we involved our energy hub at the University for Construction and Architecture, a number of civil society organizations, subject matter experts, and many professionals. They consider opportunities to develop our new building standards for green recovery purposes, and of course provisions of the new European Bauhaus standards, and those provisions which we can use for BREEAM and DGNB. As we understand, these are non-governmental organizations, and certification now can be very substantial in Ukraine. So we need to start from something. So I'm inviting you to this discussion as well. Let us discuss this first version, because this standard will have to be scrutinized before the end of this year and will have to be endorsed in general. So this work is being actively done, and we also want to help our manufacturers as well as our builders, our developers in this area. Thank you very much, Natalia. Natalia Olini, Acting Director General of the Ukrainian Standardization R&D Center and Quality Assurance. There's a colleague of yours, Natalia, sitting right next to you. One of the problems is that we have a problem with the proper understanding among Ukrainians for wood products. What's the problem for the Ukrainian manufacturers and businesses to evolve in line with the best European practice? Please. Thank you so much, Oleg, for this question. Pavlo, I want to thank you for the invitation. It's so nice to be here with you to discuss these topics. It is an extremely important topic for Ukraine. So presently, I'm sure, even now and in the recovery process, that's so important. The issues of standards is crucial, of course. This involves both national and international and the European standards as well. As it was mentioned by Olena Shulak, in the light of Ukraine's European aspirations and with the implementation of directives and regulations, for Ukraine and for subject matter ministries, this will require to pass certain standards in so many different areas. Now we're talking about Regulation 305 that has already been mentioned several times. Today, of course, all of them, there are around 500 different standards according to this regulation. And there is a problem of applying them properly because they were adopted in the original language, and not all businesses, not all the compliance institutions can apply it in the original language. So we have a great number of requests to tackle this issue somehow. So together with the ministry and with the involvement of the technical committees, we're trying to find a solution. We've been actively working on involving our partners and engaging other countries' national bodies that could get involved and try to find a solution together with us. We seek their best practice and their experience in resolving similar problems, how they managed to resolve those issues in translating national standards into the domestic languages of their nations. So that's one of the problems. There is another one, though. The National Standardization Body is a full-fledged member of the International Organization for Standardization, so this ISO. And on behalf of Ukraine, it is responsible for fulfilling all the commitments in publishing ISO standards and disseminating them. Today, this is a very important contributor to this process. So an important issue here is once in the domestic regulations or national standards, there is reference to the international standards, mandatorily it is to procure official texts, only official texts. That's an important commitment in the light of copyright. And these requirements and explanations are officially published on the Ministry of Economy's website, because this is the Ministry of Economy who's the main regulator in this field. And there's a requirement to use official texts. So I'm trying to invite all the stakeholders, as well as representatives of government, to read those requirements and try to help us duly perform our objectives and tasks. Thank you. Thank you, Natalia. Yuri Duke, Wood Industry Platform. He's joining us online, so please, Yuri, the floor is yours. Over to you. Can you hear us? Good morning. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. Very well. What's your impression? What's your feeling about the current situation in Ukraine? What's the regulatory framework that stands on the way, or what's missing towards improving or changing Ukrainian standards to be able to pursue green recovery? Thank you. First of all, let me underline the high level of this event. Amazing speakers, just fabulous interventions. Bullseye in every single intervention. There are so many issues that are being disclosed today. Kislevsky and the previous speakers were saying absolutely correctly when they compared ourselves with the neighboring countries. Let me tell you in a nutshell what I think about the current situation. I think it is high time for us to mature. This is not only about processing industry or forestry management companies. Government has to get more mature as well. Let's stop pointing fingers on someone and saying that this is the one who's standing on my neck. Oh, environmentalists create barriers for processing industries. No, that's absolutely not true. Environmental experts, and thanks to FSC Ukraine, have been maintaining a very productive dialogue with us. They defend European standards in wood processing and forest management and other areas. We might say this is redundant, but for the Ukrainian businesses and for the Ukraine's economy in general, that's very important, that's crucial, because we do trade with Europe, and the previous speaker rightly mentioned, your product needs to comply with all those rules, regulations, and requirements that exist in Europe, then we're going to buy it from you. Then after this, we only can start discussing prices. So for business, that's crucial to maintain this dialogue. There is something else I wanted to tell you about. You rightly mentioned it before, that forest industry is not just the one that produces logs for exports. This is the sector that's working, contributing a lot to the Ukraine's domestic recovery. Whether it's going to be large scale or small scale, lasting long time or not, this sector can deliver huge volumes of products for not only building a house, but also building and manufacturing what's inside the house. All that could be manufactured by Ukrainian businesses with foreign investment or without foreign investment. The Ukrainian processing industry will have enough capacity to process everything, and therefore those materials can be and must be used for erecting residential and non-residential real estate. But the problem is that we need to realize this is high time to demonstrate clear political will and good understanding from government and the Ukraine's parliament, who need to understand that evaluating the contribution from the forest sector is just huge. And we will have to actually evaluate everything in the number of jobs created, taxes paid, but not just from the financial reports of the forests of Ukraine, because those figures are not comparable. Dmytro Kiselevsky alluded to this already. Politicians keep talking about this as well, but it's high time to start action with clear understanding. If after 1 year we're not going to have any technical or otherwise possibility to build it with Ukrainian manufactured product, then it's going to be a bitter aftermath for the country. So those formal barriers have to be eliminated with enough political will, and this has to change really fast. So what do we have on the priority list, especially what has to do with Ukraine's domestic market? Building and recovery of residential real estate and social infrastructure. First of all, we have quite sustainable forests. We have good industry. We have our own industry in place. We have taxes, because budget revenues is a crucial issue. And those taxes are paid by Ukrainian manufacturers. It's not even comparable with export duties. We have taxes paid by employees themselves. We have jobs for those people. We again have purchasing power. A cynical Ukrainian partner will always say, stop asking for money, make the money yourself. And if we can make money from wood processing, furniture manufacturing, to then be able to build even more, that's going to be an ideal solution. That's the only right way to do it. And that's economically sustainable model. Because of course, some of the building materials will be funded by the European partners, but we need to also realize that in the future, Ukraine will have to build itself back better by making money from selling different products out there. So in conclusion, apart from those standards and regulations, we need to have clear political will from government to not only do the blah blah thing and tell fancy stories, but also to really walk the talk like we said before. Like Dmytro Kiselevsky, we have to all stand up and say, I'm going to be defending this thing until I get the right result, the right outcome. Then there's going to be trust and understanding that there is buy-in from government, and the key economic actors are ready to get engaged and take care of it. So I think that's exactly what we all want. And again, it was confirmed by Dmytro Kiselevsky as well as Volodymyr Vlasyuk, who clearly demonstrated the figures why this is so important. If somebody says this is purely emotional, no, the figures have confirmed it's not. The contribution can be just huge. Thank you. Thank you, Yuri. Thank you for mentioning Mr. Volodymyr. we can see you back. So if you have something to add, go ahead. Let us finish your message, because you started alluding to some very important things, and then your connection dropped. Yeah, thank you. I don't know when exactly I was disconnected.
Нашої дискусії, що
We would like to encourage you to continue this conversation about timber. From the timber we log today, we can make much more added value from it. The Poles actually harvest 39 million cubic meters and generate $19 billion, and we only 1.4. If we use everything we have, we do not need this extensive model by growing the logging areas. We need to process more, and this has to be incentivized by policies. Once again, if we change the building regulations and standards where we are going to use those bars, wooden bars, for construction purposes, this is going to be a very important step forward. We need to ensure access to raw material. I'm a proponent of an idea that we need to give priority access to the best wood to companies that do processing in Ukraine. And there has to be dependency. The deeper the processing is, the better access this company is going to have to procuring raw materials. This has to be organized on different marketplaces. The forests of Ukraine will have to play an important role here, because without this, everything will be in vain. That's not really difficult. We need to be resolved, and we need to be decisive on this. Thank you. Thank you so much, Volodymyr, for this absolutely right message. So please, what are your feelings, guys? What's also standing in our way from the legislative standpoint or regulatory frameworks-wise to make sure Ukraine has high-rises built from wood? Yep, who's willing to speak up, please? Both online and offline. Victoria Kolomits. I'm sorry, Valeria. My apologies. No offense. Dear colleagues, I am a representative of the environmental organization. We protect the environment, but in the report is great. I mean, I read it yesterday. But in the conclusions, I found that, however, the goal of the European Union is to increase the volumes of products coming from wood. So we're talking about the recovery based on forests. The focus of our organization is exactly in the same direction. We were talking about the markets, economic growth. Our organization has always been supportive of the right forest management practices. We understand Ukraine has to manage its forests better. That's why we work with the OPG and APC. It's very important to discuss the European integration, how we move to Europe, what kind of values we support. But at the same time, however, I'd like to mention, dear colleagues, right now in the Ukraine's parliament, there is Bill 9516, and it is in violation of several European directives. What we're talking about today is, despite the need for economic growth and military demands, we as FSC Ukraine have to push forward the message that the wood has to be produced in the best, following the best European practices. And there is a bill on the agenda. It was submitted already. So we managed to actually get the language of this bill. However,
проголосований в першому читанні.
There are still a lot of challenging issues that we need to take care of properly.
Комітету європейської політики.
Despite the negative conclusion by the European Policy Committee, despite the letter from the EU delegation to Ukraine, which mentioned that during the war it's not possible to abolish the environmental risk
Але я
assessment.
впевнена, що все ж таки ми з вами маємо в тому числі впливати
Oh,
на
impact
цей
assessment, I'm
процес,
sorry, environmental impact assessment, that's right, yeah.
які стосуються
We need to
ринку
actually
деревини.
make sure that all those legislative initiatives, specifically those that have to do with wood markets and forest management, they have to be in line with the best European practices.
Конкурентно спроможна, а відповідно
We want to make sure our wood is competitive
природна
and our nature at the same time would not suffer
все ж таки мали можливість
from
відновлюватися,
logging.
не зменшувалися, як
because forests need to be able to recover and not shrink,
не така вже і висока. Дякую.
because our forested area is not that large as compared to other countries.
Дякую.
Okay, Pablo, did you want to say something? Thank you. Thank you, Oleg. I just wanted to reply to one of the messages expressed here. Several times you have mentioned the new European Bauhaus. And this name, this title, is there in one of these strategic papers. This is the Ukraine facility. I think we're being repetitive in terms of some of the fancy words, not even understanding what's behind. I can see that we need to be talking more about, not that about names, not that much about names, but about proper understanding of this. We need to remind our government officials of the scope.
Далі ми говоримо для того, щоб його втілити і краще наблизити до суспільства, для того, щоб донести і показати, яким чином можна забезпечити гармонію між природними рішеннями архітектурними і якістю життя, коли ми говоримо про урбаністичне якраз середовище, то для цього і виникла...
When we're talking about urban developments, that's exactly why this initiative is for. FSC is a partner of the new European Bauhaus. We also have our official partners from the Bauhaus here in the meeting. And I'm sure we can work jointly together to disclose the essence of what so many documents talk about and where they use such a word combination, that there will be principles where they apply. With this kind of definition, we bring more and more clarity. And here we can really pursue a strategic goal. Thank you very much indeed. Yuri Duke, please. You wanted to say something?
Хочу два нюанси ще додати.
Yes, just two things to mention.
Справді, деревина ресурс
Wood
відновлюваний,
is a really important resource
тому ми чітко
for
розуміємо,
Ukraine's recovery process.
що як ці безконтрольні вирубки не мають бути.
And those uncontrolled logging practices have to be stopped forever.
Має бути європейським підходом ведення.
There must be, things must be put under control, and for that purpose we need to explore and implement the best European forest management practices. We already mentioned investment today. Indeed, just for your reference, the moratorium has to be maintained. As Mitchell alluded to, we need to keep pushing in-depth processing forward. We're not going to have those huge mills anymore. They're going to be much smaller because they're much more economically viable. We have a huge unexplored potential. Just like in Poland, however, they have already employed it as much as possible. We still have a lot of potential remaining untapped. And again, like I said, we need to explore even more opportunities to be able to build houses from wood. Even during the war,
будівництво з деревини.
A typical Ukrainian does not clearly understand and is not probably supportive of the wooden house idea.
Переваг і дуже активно
But anyways, we need to make sure we disseminate proper information and try to actually shed light on what those building qualities are, what advantages wooden houses can have as compared to traditional concrete and steel.
найбільший, скажімо, вихід.
This kind of understanding is going to be crucial for attracting even more investment and generating more added value, as well as creating jobs for the population. So indeed, there is nothing brand new here. This is just an example of good economic potential once tapped, like they do in the US and in some of the most advanced EU member states. This is something that we need to focus on and emphasize as much as possible.
Має можливість репліку.
Okay, there is an opportunity to give the floor to Orest. Yes, two things to mention. Just to be able to speed up building houses from wood, we need to answer one question. What do we want to build? Are those going to be public buildings or those are going to be residential ones? Once we answer this question, we then need to answer another one. How many of those buildings we want to build? Answering those two questions will make a clear situation with funding and investment. Regarding the second remark, I, as a faculty member of the university, I do not even know of any more comprehensive and consistent activities than training. We need to think about it. If we're talking about building houses of wood, that's very challenging because we need to train our professionals who are now being at the verge of different technologies like environmental protection activists and a building expert. Yeah, so we need to incorporate education into this process, of course. Natalia. There is one more important thing to underline. Development is a sector which has local footprint. So we understand that wooden houses, once they're brought from other countries, are going to be very costly, logistics-wise. It's not economically viable, is it? Unless we have special mandate for it. Now we're talking about multi-story buildings made from wood. We first want to see large-scale projects, and for that to happen, we need to actively involve our investors in the manufacturing capacity building. We can see that we have technology parks that are growing very fast, and I'm sure soon we're going to see modern manufacturing capabilities. And once that is seen, then we're going to see also those large-scale projects that Oleg was alluding to. Because indeed, this is going to be economically viable, this is going to be lucrative business-wise. That's how it's going to attract investment, and that's going to be also beneficial for the local population. I'm sure the people will want to live in such houses. Brian, I know you wanted to say something as well. You either can speak up now, or we can discuss also another topic. Can every timber in Ukraine, can every wood once used is a contributor to green transition? Or we can actually think about more in-depth involvement of wood. Thank you, thank you. I just wanted to say to pass some of those messages across after what Natalia and Natalia Olinik have said. Regarding the regulations and laboratories, as Natalia has mentioned earlier on, I had a chance to discuss these funding options for labs to be able to test wood materials
фінансуванням з допомогою USAID,
from using the USAID's funding mechanisms where I used to work before. So there was an idea, let us support
важливі лабораторії.
those very important laboratories,
Постійно є
and there is always
за
very rigid competition.
грошами, коштами.
Um,
Теж був
for this money.
питання був
There was always a question,
від інших державних органів
our request from other government agencies.
на кордони
So they say, hey, guys, can you help us
переходу.
at the border crossing points, please?
Це дуже важливий вопрос для
Because this is a very crucial issue for to be able to export grain.
USAID вибрав
And the donor, the USAID, said, okay,
зерна, це вопрос просто горить.
grain exports is a really crucial issue right now.
Це лабораторії, це дуже важливе. А пане Олійник,
The laboratories are very important.
є
Madam Olinik has said that there is need
прості дуже багато.
to just translate so many regulations into Ukrainian.
Голос будівельної галузі, деревообробної галузі,
The voice of the wood processing, forestry management, and other companies has to be passed over
донорам,
to donors. They need to be heard, as well as the cabinet of ministers too.
та громко.
This voice has to be very loud, because there is always very severe competition for money.
Я думаю, що ще не
But I think
чули голос галузі
the industry has not spoken out loud yet
у європейських донорів
with the EU.
і може навіть не у Кабміну.
And maybe even the cabinet hasn't heard it properly. At the level that is necessary
Інвестування зараз
for everybody to understand that funding is crucial to build the laboratories. We need to also approximate our building regulations. The issue of market access for multiple Ukrainian companies is crucial. That's a question of
допит, спрос на українську деревину,
demand for the Ukrainian wood
лісгоспів,
in
для підприємства лісів.
produced by so many forest farms in Ukraine, like the forest of Ukraine, for instance.
Може, вони поки що не розуміли
Maybe they do not yet quite understand
питання,
how to resolve the issue.
тому я перейду на
That's why
третій блок.
I'm gonna move to the third part of it.
Суспільство.
This is civil society. How do we make sure that we organize and build proper consensus
Будівельної галузі, лісової
involving forests, development sector, and civil society?
Деревина – це зелений ресурс.
And
Це важливо.
we therefore have to build understanding that wood is a green resource, and that's important.
Потрібно інвестувати
And that's worth investing
міжнародний ресурс,
both national and international resources into its development.
а щоб це стало можливо,
And for this to happen,
консенсус і була така
to reach the consensus is and to build the coalition
говорить донорам,
of people who discuss those issues with the cabinet and the donors, like, hey, let's invest into the sector.
потрібен діалог.
For this to happen, we need a dialogue.
Представники сьогодні
Today's roundtable discussion representatives, civil society, from the civil society, they're very serious. They're really important actors.
слухали від
We've already heard of
Валерії Коломієць.
Valeria Kolomiyets.
Колеги,
Dear colleagues,
чи вписуються будівельні матеріали з деревини в концепцію,
the building materials of wood in line with the
як представник
green recovery from your standpoint?
ну, громадська
For you as representatives of environmental protection activism,
сьогодні
and
організувати
does FSC, who organized this today's roundtable discussion,
зеленими є будівельні
contribute to
деревини?
using more green
Важливо
building materials
обговорити з вами.
we really need to discuss these issues with you because we want to see consensus.
Брайане, дякую. Тож давайте
Thank you, Brian.
цю частину, нашої-
Let us really discuss these two issues and try to support. Okay, Mr. Roman, question to you.
Сьогодні концепція зеленого будівництва і
How
деревина,
green building and wood,
концепції це
as part of it,
в одному напрямку
moves in the same
правильно
direction towards evolution? What do you think? Hello, dear colleagues. This is a really comprehensive issue. We just need to operationalize this green recovery vision. This is something that everybody wants. We all talk about it, but not everybody understands what it means really. Sooner or later, this is going to be done, of course, but the only thing I want to mention right now is that our organization is involved in circular economy, and we do support the idea of using wood as a green solution to the recovery process. There are two more important aspects here, or two very important aspects. Using wood as a replacement to more or less environmentally sustainable bearing constructions. And secondly, the way it is logged, this wood is logged, and if the logging is done in a sustainable manner and in an economically viable way, that's exactly what's going to contribute to Ukraine's green recovery and green development. So we need to recover a lot of those resources and even make them redundant sometimes. Or sorry, not redundant, but abundant. There is an important call that is going to take place today with the international partners, and we already discussed those issues with them too. With the translating of the standards or whatever, those problems that somebody discussed, to me, this is not even a problem, really. Just recently, maybe a couple of months ago, we had a webinar on biodiversity and biomaterials in construction. We had Dutch and British architects and builders on that call, and we clearly admitted that we have not yet, I mean, especially in the Ukrainian society, we have not yet come to a proper understanding of. We couldn't recover from even the 17th century fire in London. And after this, they used more timber for heating purposes and not as a construction material. We have a lot of people thinking that wood is not a good thing, and this is quite dangerous for the fire safety standpoint. And that's why one cannot erect buildings taller than 3 floors using wood. So I'm sure we have to work more with government agencies so that this message gets across and all this technology gets disseminated in the society for its proper understanding of the fact that using wood is a good thing for not only the economy and the environment, but also for themselves, for the people. Thank you. We have people online. Hopefully Natalia Kozub can actually speak up right now. Natalia, can you hear us? Yes, I can. Thank you very much for the invitation and for this great roundtable discussion. So much information, so many good ideas. I'm from the Urban Coalition Roskvit. We're involved in the green recovery projects, primarily of strategic nature in the cities and other urban areas, and we run pilot projects of general construction in a sustainable way. All in all, the architecture community really supports the idea of building houses from wood
бульбашка, в якій
And that architectural bulb that I exist inside of
будівництво
believes that building of wood is
і це дуже важливо.
an important part of the national recovery. But when it comes to practical projects,
Увесь час ми маємо
for all this time we've faced
з нормами
this
і
problem
законодавством, те, що
of
багато разів
the building regulations and legislation. But also not only this, this also includes certification for some of the wood-based materials. We do not have certification properly established in Ukraine.
які використовують
That's why manufacturers using wood in their products
деревину закуповувати в Польщі.
complain that it's cheaper for them to buy wood from Slovak Republic or Poland than from Ukraine.
Панелі, я зараз кажу про солом'яно-дерев'яні панелі.
I'm talking about destroying wood boards. We believe that that's a very promising material for Ukraine because straw has very high heat insulation properties and low carbon footprint. We used this technology in one of the projects as requested by the Lviv City Council, but the board manufacturer cannot procure Ukrainian wood because there is no certification in place. As much as I understand this from his own experience, just recently I watched the environmental declaration for products database and I found no certificates from Ukraine for just solid timber. However, there are certificates for other types of products. For the cross-laminated timber, there is one, and for just timber, there is none. That's why the use of the Ukrainian wood is a challenging process. The COT that is manufactured by CLT, cross-laminated timber, produced in Korostin, is facing a lot of challenges today. However, there is goodwill and there is no technical possibility yet, but I'm sure it's going to be resolved. Thank you. Roman Grishenko, a co-founder of the Green Building Coalition. Council, I'm sorry. Please. Good morning, dear colleagues. I'm so glad to see you. And thanks to organizers for this event, because we can discuss here some very important things. We're all talking about green recovery here, but very few of us realize how this is going to happen. And moreover, how we are going to measure everything, whether it is green or not. I'm more on the green certification side. If we want to certify a building as the one that was erected in a green way, what are we going to establish? What are we going to measure? Because according to the European Bauhaus's best practices, we need to create an environment that has enough understanding of what products can be called green, and then therefore what kind of houses can be called green if they are built from these materials. If we involve someone else and a third party who will verify everything, it's going to be a third party certification. So when we're talking about the green recovery inside Ukraine, it must involve third party certification. And then we can definitely say that this building complies with a certain measure criteria, and this is verified by the third party. Who can be the third party? This is still a disputable issue. There are so many certification systems in the world. There are hundreds of them. You've heard BREEAM, LEED, DGNB, Well Active House, etc. But the three latter ones are the most important, the most popular. Without those certification systems, one cannot say the building is green. So there has to be certified wood used for this purpose. It's just in black and white letters.
Бо більше ми говоримо за те, що я так хотів би розвірити, оскільки заговорив за сертифікацію.
Since I'm talking about certification, I'd like to refute three myths. It's expensive, it's not possible, and it's not possible in Ukraine. It's not viable. In Ukraine, we have the possibilities. We have the experts who know a lot about it. There are certified buildings. Before the war, before the active phase of war, the certification trend had been growing. And in society and among businesses, there were requests for certification. They were asking questions like how to use the certified wood, how to use certified materials, etc. Sometimes we're facing a problem. We do not know how it works. There were a lot of ideas that training is crucial here. We need to build awareness in the society that green recovery is a crucial thing for Ukraine. There's also one more thing I wanted to mention. As we're developing the Ukrainian standard, it's now under public discussion for public buildings, I mean the standard is. But I wanted to say that we want to run two things. The problem is that BRIAM and DGNB, they're more rated for the West. In Ukraine, we need to be adapted to it. Since we're going to the European Union, we have to actually align all our provisions and requirements to the European Union standards. Like the colleague complained about the translation issue.
Ну, каже, ми там до 3-ї сторінки дочитали, далі не зрозуміло, як його використовувати. Придумали ДБН, А2.2, адаптація до ЄН.
They said that they did not even read the standard, the European standard to the end. They said we only read 3 first pages and then we created the new building requirement, the building regulation. If we're adapting everything, there is again an issue of the EU taxonomy. They are already, some of those actors have already been using this EU taxonomy principles. And again, it's not a translation issue. We as a public council, we're a member of the Green Building Council. We have memoranda with a number of organizations, but we said, take our standard and adapt it to the Ukrainian reality. They give us the standard. It's not even a translation issue. It's just a common problem that requires our joint effort. We need to clearly say what green recovery is and how we're going to measure it. That's the most important thing. Sometimes in Ukraine we say this is green, somebody says it's white, somebody else says it's black. And when we have all that information, all those facts, back it up by figures, and once it's even on top of that, once it's verified by the third party, preferably from the Western world, it's going to be absolutely straightforward and really understood well across the board, because we can call it whatever we want, but it's not going to be green unless it's approved by the third party. Olena, would you like to say, what is Ukrainian wood in the context of green recovery and green construction? Since I already expressed all my ideas, let me just briefly once again underline. First of all, this is about forests, this is about consuming CO2, and this is about our future. So really, from the standpoint of our organization, we propagate an idea that despite the needs for recovery, despite, yes, there is state-of-the-art technology that allows using Ukrainian wood. We travel across Europe, we've seen certified wood products. And there is this sustainability that is enhanced in the circular economy through the use of wood. We all have to now realize that this is the resource. It is renewable, but it's only renewable when we speak about generations. In everything that we have, in the context of green and sustainable recovery processes, there's rebuilding and reconstruction, we need to also operate those terms too. And all this, we need to understand that
те, що ми
The most crucial thing is what we understand and how we understand the best practices of using all the natural resources, not just wood. Thank you.
Є можливість
There is a possibility to jump into this discussion. Maybe our online participants would like to say something, or shall we do the wrap up?
Пане Павло.
Pablo, what do you think? Thank you so much. Dear colleagues, I'd like to share a short remark before we wrap up. In our second part of the discussion, when we talked about regulations, we were talking about training as well. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that there are training tools available, and there is an available online course developed under the Home for Future project. It was initiated by FSC in the Netherlands and Denmark, which is focused on increasing the share of wood in building materials. The course is available, it is free of charge, and there is a chance to already take advantage of it. The link is available in the chat. Sustainable development using wood. That's something small I wanted to add here. So we have one of the questions in the chat here from one of the participants online, Igor. It's a professional issue, but I'd like to voice it. Maybe somebody has an answer to it already. Who can actually tell us what's the longevity of those multi-story buildings built of wood? Is it comparable with the brick houses? And how does it come in terms of costs? So how long will this building last? It is important to mention here that longevity is no longer applicable. When we're talking about green recovery, we're talking about life cycle management. And it not only takes into consideration longevity, but all the criteria, economic feasibility and disposal, the carbon footprint, etc. For instance, if we take a house of bricks, those things are not even comparable. We need to take a comprehensive look and refrain from longevity principle by getting used to the notion of life cycle management. On the Ministry of Environmental Policy's website, there is a calculator that helps evaluate life cycle of a building or a project or whatever. It would take the lead BREEAM and DGNB, that's a broadly used mechanism. So I don't think this is a correct issue. When we're talking about the national building regulations, today there is only a parametric method implemented in those regulations, which is used for the criteria. Okay, if we're talking about the state building regulations, it doesn't say 2 floors or 3 stories and how wide the wall, how thick the wall should be. We're talking about energy efficiency. We're talking about some of those parameters that this outside structure needs to provide for. So according to the parametric method, it defines the way how you want to erect it. So first of all, there must be awareness built and refraining from the old-fashioned ways of thinking. Vasil Sidor, he is online with us. He has a chance to answer the question or ask one. I'm from Slavuta. I'm the city mayor. It looks like forests are all around the place. You can go and log everywhere you want. That's not true. Especially right now, with the establishment of the forests of Ukraine,
можна було більш-менш
we have things running much better.
Вони сьогодні втратили свою
Today,
відсутність. Друге,
those companies are not competing anymore.
лісових
There is no
це, я рахую, дуже великий
good
негатив.
processing,
Створення приватного
capacity,
лісового, акціонерного лісового
private joint stock companies are not
величезний тягар. От, і
available.
ми розглядаємо можливість будівництва
And
житлових.
we are now considering building houses from
На цьому
wood.
фонді як виглядить питання створення акціонерного лісового господарства і
Well,
монополізації
at
лісової гази?
from this
Наскільки воно
standpoint,
виправдає?
how
На мою думку,
good it is to
це є
monopolize
передчасно і
this
наразі
sector. I think that's a
воно не
premature solution. It's not in the best interest of the people in Ukraine.
Дякую вам за вашу репліку.
Mr. Vasil mentioned the forest of Ukraine is a monopoly.
створення
Yeah, let me jump in.
Так, йдеться про те, що відбулася
What Mr. Vasil was trying to say that there was a forestry reform in Ukraine and some of the state businesses, state-owned enterprises were merged into a single company called Forests of Ukraine. So 70 to 80% of all the forests are managed by the Forests of Ukraine. That's a one-stop state-owned enterprise. Yes, I understand. Thank you. Please, could I ask a question? Please introduce yourself. I'm Halina Timi from UkrInform. I just wanted to ask, according to the experts who just spoke, I understand green recovery is important from the economic and environmental standpoints. Could you tell what's the share of wood that you expect to have in the Ukraine's recovery process, at least roughly? Just for us to better understand more specifically how it's going to work. Who can answer this one? Well, I wouldn't even dare answering this question. Maybe Brian Milakovsky can say it, or maybe Mr. Vlasuk, who's involved in all those issues on a professional basis, can answer. These are the two potential people who I believe can answer this question. Let's listen to Mr. Volodymyr and then.
Дякую, Брайан. Дякую,
Thank you,
колеги.
Brian. Thanks, colleagues.
Дивіться, ми робили роботу.
Yes, we were doing one of the projects. We were trying to evaluate how much construction material we're going to need for recovery purposes. 31 different types of building materials we established, like cement, concrete, bricks, wood products like doors, windows, window frames, etc. So part of those wood products, of course, if we don't take furniture into consideration, or I don't know, wooden floor, that's a very insignificant part. I would say around 1 or 2% only in all this general mix. I can be mistaken by 1%, but the share is not significant. If we were talking about building back better and this principle that we are now discussing, of course we're talking about much greater share of wood and wood products in this kind of construction material mix. If it could replace steel, which probably takes 8 to 9% in the construction mix. We're talking about beams and whatever, fortification. If timber could be used, then it could be around 10% altogether. Thank you. That's my vision at least. Roman, please. We're talking about the already erected building. But in the course of building the used wood, I think that's a very good question. If there is a capacity to do it, then it would be good to have a study like this. When, for instance, the general contractor comes for a certification, there is a problem that this contractor cannot pass some of the criteria as required by the international standards because they use not certified timber. And if case they have certificates, they don't know how to verify them. but timber is still used very actively in the course of construction, I'm sorry. Yep.
Дякую.
Thank you.
Ще маленьке питання, якщо можна.
Just a small question, if possible.
Фінансова частина цікавить.
Regarding the financial part of it,
Взагалі, якесь
is there a vision
скільки необхідно,
regarding how much
скільки необхідно фінансових ресурсів для того,
financial resources we're going to need to have everything implemented,
чи поки
all those initiatives that have been announced, or it's still difficult to tell how much it's going to cost.
На сертифікацію, гроші на зелене
You
відновлення.
mean green recovery money or certification money? For what? At the national scale, you mean?
Ну, я думаю, що ми можемо
Well, I think we can
говорити про...
talk about.
Так, мені
Please. Yes, can you hear me? Yeah,
Я
Brian.
думаю, що ми можемо говорити про...
I think we can talk about some very short-term
потреби у
needs for funding.
Це не ціна цієї
It's
деревини.
not going to be the value of the entire timber or wood that is needed.
Сьогодні
Like
Наталія Олександрівна.
Natalia has mentioned today already,
Ми теж чули від...
and then we heard the same story from Natalia Kozub.
Потрібно створити лабораторії, які
We need to
можуть
create labs which can
сертифікацією
do the certification
українських дерев'яних
for the Ukrainian
матеріалів.
wooden
А якщо
construction
ми
materials.
займаємося,
And if we're not doing it,
складно їх
so
використовувати.
it's going to be very difficult to use them in the Ukraine's recovery process.
Є величезне.
Now, this is a huge question,
Це питання
price-wise, costs-wise.
10-20
It's 10 to 20
євро, наприклад.
million euro, for instance.
Цю інвестицію
And if this investment is not done right now,
створити бар'єр
then we can create a barrier
дуже великої суми
for so many
скажу,
actors in this procurement exercise.
якщо ми не зробимо цю інвестицію,
In failure to do this investment right now, it's going to be very difficult to get
Розвивати цю галузь.
так,
to develop the sector and get billions and billions of dollars, euro in investment
в галузі
into the sector.
дерев'яних будматеріалів у відновленні. Дуже важливо зараз зробити
So it's very important right now to invest in labs and harmonizing and translating the regulations and
освіту, так, тренінг,
education and training, as it was mentioned today,
Україна була
so that Ukraine is ready to use wood in its recovery. And then later, it's going to be leveraged by markets.
Якщо буде умови для використання.
If there are sufficient conditions for using wood, this is going to be
питання, на що ми будемо тратити гроші від
there will be a question, how we want to spend the donor money, how we invest the money from the Ukraine's budget. And it's going to be a number of options. There'll be Ukrainian, sustainable, concrete, imported building materials, or Ukrainian domestically produced building materials. So we need to create best conditions for the development of the sector of processing primarily. This is something that Ukraine needs in terms of investment, in terms of priorities. Unfortunately, dear colleagues, we now have to wrap up because that's already after 12 in Kyiv. Please, Pavlo, if you can make a conclusion about today's discussion. Thank you so much, Oleg, for your support. And I want to stress that we could not consider all the questions at this roundtable discussion, so it is to be continued. Orest, I think we are going to be building these roundtable discussions together with your involvement. You had your hand raised. I'm sorry about this because we're running out of time. The first thing that we heard today is we now stress the importance of green recovery
Перш за все, ми
and forests will contribute to this greatly. Today, this roundtable discussion, in spite of the challenging circumstances we'll face, we've seen a representative of the parliament, a member of parliament, we have seen the national government, agencies, people, civil society, and even today I heard such an important word as synergies. I think thanks to such activities like today's event, we're going to be able to find a lot of commonalities that are going to help us disseminate proper information to get a good buy-in in the society about these ideas. There are projects, there are bodies, commissions, and committees. We can we have a member of parliament on board with us. We can always ask her questions and seeking her support. Of course, there will be a number of legislative initiatives that will require very in-depth public discussions, and the issues are quite challenging. While the situation is not easy, we still need to be seeking for consensus, and this is something that our organization can support. For quite a while, politicians have been asking the question this way: are you with us or you're without us? It's always either bad or good, or the betrayal, treason, or victory. It's not always black and white. We need to be seeking compromises, and we are not starting from scratch. Regarding all those important issues, how much it can cost, what's necessary to make sure the recovery is there and it is there and green, that's perfect. That's perfect to discuss everything. As of today, 47% of Ukrainian forests are FSC certified. Most of the actors in Ukraine are certified as well. I mean, in the processing sector as well. We're trying to show the best practices by involving our experts and disseminating all this information to you. In today's discussion and the follow-up, we need to create conditions for the domestic market to be more lucrative and competitive as compared to the exports market outreach. We can see some of the best Western practices. They create new architectural forms and by implementing new building standards, they are pursuing the same dimension, increasing the use of wood in development purposes, for the development purposes. That's going to be very important for the Ukraine's European integration path. And also we recalled the EU taxonomy. Why should we use it so that when a decision will have to be made, we're going to have a question. Okay, dear colleagues, can you do it properly? Yes, but the entire green recovery logic is pushing us forward to using wood, more wood. That's why it's really important to perform all those strict requirements. Dear colleagues, we're not saying this is full stop. This is just to be continued. This roundtable discussion is just a kickoff for building coalitions and partnerships, which can already be operational, and they have to be employed for our future cooperation. I would like to thank our expert, Brian Milakovsky. Believe me, the report that he has prepared, it's going to be very interesting for everybody to read. So please read it whenever you have time. We want to thank Oleg for moderating today's event. I think you have managed to ensure proper balance between different opinions. And this again confirms that together we can work for the results that are going to be fruitful for everybody. Yes, Sergey. Yeah, I just wanted to share something with our colleagues. You know, Mike Potter once said there's a tragedy of the common tragedy. And such commodities as wood or fish in the ocean, all that consumption has to be controlled to make sure it is sustainable. Otherwise, our planet will crash. If Ukraine does not
сьогодні слухав деякі тези, що у нас тут насправді є законопроекти катастрофічні.
start being sustainable, if we continue to be blind to those issues and keep being not responsible in terms of using the resources, it's going to be a big collapse. Thanks very much to all the participants. Thanks very much for all your opinions, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.